So hey homeschool friends, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to today's video, which is part 2, where I answer all of the Sonlight questions that I have been getting over the years. A lot of times these are the ones that I get asked often, but I also was just pulling questions from all the videos I've been making. I'll put, again, a link to the Sonlight playlist I have above for all the different content that I have put together for Sonlight if you're just curious. So last time I was able to cover science as well as language arts, and in today's video we are going to do history, Bible, literature. So stay tuned for all the questions. So hi, my name is Angie. Welcome to the channel. If you're new, welcome back. If you have been coming for a while, all the things. And so let's just hop back in to my questions. Like I said, I have a whole sheet of questions for just the history, Bible, and literature. And these are just a hodgepodge of questions, and hopefully I can kind of answer these, but you can apply it to your situation. But like I was saying at the end of last video, I would love to hear more from you. I would love more questions. And if I collect enough, I will do another like mini Q&A based on the questions from these two videos. So ask any of your Sonlight questions, specific, broad, whatever you want. But like I said, I'm going to finish up my questions on the history, Bible, literature. So the first question is, does HBL have any worksheets, or is it just the book reading plan? HBL does not have worksheets. So this can be confusing. So science, there's science worksheets and there's language arts worksheets, which I talked about more in the last video. But for the HBL, the history, Bible, literature, there are not sheets to do. It really is the books and it's the discussion. And how you discuss is up to you, whether you use narration, whether you use the discussion questions. But really, it feels like almost too easy that you read books and ask questions and have discussions, but it works. And I feel like it's because Sonlight is very strategic in how they pick their books. They pick them to happen kind of at similar times or right after each other, so you can kind of pull in things that you learned from the last read aloud into the history reading and be like, oh, do you see kind of how that would have felt for that character in that book in this situation? And you can really kind of mix and match it, and it isn't as linear as maybe you think. Like, I think it is just a little, there's more breadth to it. And as you go, you get better at it. You do. And I feel like that's kind of the fun part is, especially if you start with some of the younger levels, it's simpler and it builds as it goes and you get better at handling that. But not to say you can't jump in midway. I just feel like I've appreciated kind of how I've grown as a teacher and being able to facilitate a literature-based program. But to go on with the rest of the question, they said, and where do all those Sonlight readers fit in? Are those just read alouds you go through during the year, or are there any scheduled independent reading? And so this is an important question because it can get confusing. So especially with the HBLs. So with the history, Bible, literature. So the books that are literature are read alouds, and you are reading aloud to your child through all of elementary and middle school. It's not till high school when they start to really read everything themselves and there's no read alouds. So any books that are marked read alouds are for you to read out loud to your child within the HBL program. But the HBL programs will also have you select a reader level. And I believe that's even if you don't use the language arts program, they'll have you select a reader level, especially within those younger years where it depends on how fast your child is learning to read. They might be doing HBLB and level 3 readers. And so you'll pick the readers based on their level, and then the reader package that comes with it are what they read independently. And both read aloud and reader books have discussion questions that are at the end of the instructor guide for you to help facilitate questions, whether you're reading it aloud to them or whether they're reading it on the couch by themselves and you want to see what they're getting from it. So those are kind of your sets of books, and it can be a little confusing in the sense of where do they come from, because like you could also do the language arts program and you'll see the independent readers also scheduled within the language arts. It just really depends on where you're at, but it is very explained. And I suggest, if this is kind of a confusing thing to you, go to the Sonlight samples. Every program has a 3-week sample that you can download, whether it be language arts, HBL, or science, and you can download them all and you can kind of look and maybe wrap your head around where all of these things are scheduled and it will even include some of those discussion questions in that sample. So I highly recommend checking that out in order to kind of better understand maybe how you would use it or what programs you would pull from. Next though, is how instrumental is it to have the instructor's guide if you are just using the book list only? I'm not sure. I guess I would always say the instructor's guide is gold. You guys, I feel like I get so much help from the instructor's guide. Sometimes not so much. Sometimes I'll have my own questions and I'll kind of take the discussion a different way, but it's always there for when I need it. But mostly it helps me schedule what I'm reading. So if you went on Sonlight's website, you would see the read alouds for a certain level, but you wouldn't see like what order they go in or anything like that, because that's more proprietary information that you get only when you order the instructor's guide, is like what order they're read in, at what pace, and how does it link to the history. So it's like they do all that like puzzling together of the topics and the pacing that for me, that's really nice. And I guess I wouldn't imagine myself using the book list without the instructor's guide, because you're pretty much just using the program if you use their whole book list. So I'm not sure, but I love my instructor's guide. So anyway, the next question is it possible to use the guide for just literature, read alouds, and Bible? I'm thinking I just won't purchase the history books. Yes, you can definitely do that. Like, I feel like you'll miss out on a little bit of that depth and that connection that Sonlight's really good at, connecting some of the readers to the history and things like that. But yes, of course you can. If you have a history that you really love or something like that, you can pick up the instructor guide and the books and follow just that line across all 36 weeks. If you're looking for just the read alouds and the readers and the Bible, you can just follow that and X out all the history. Definitely, you can use the program how you need to. I feel like you always need to use it how you need to, because otherwise you would miss out on those amazing aspects that you're interested in just because you're not interested in the history. I say go for it. You can get it and just X out history if that's what you're thinking of doing. All right, and then it says, in your experience, would you say you could do HBLK with a third grader? So this probably was HBLK when it was American history. And so now that American history content has been moved to first grade. And so yes, definitely. I did it, how old were my kiddos? I did it with a second grader and a first grader, I think, when I did HBLK, back when it was labeled K. I used it for second grader and first grader. Now I think it's labeled for like first to third potentially. But yes, I thought that program had just a depth of information, and my older child, my second grader, got so much more out of it than even my first grader. And so I would say for a third grade, yes, definitely, it would be a wonderful program for a third grader. And if you feel like, for instance, that they could use some more, I mean, you can kind of gauge your student on that, but there are so many resources that you can add to that. And if you feel like your child, your third grader, could handle some longer chapter books, you could do some research into finding ones that maybe have some really cool ties to American history. So yes, you could definitely do that. Another one about HBLK. It says, looking into ordering Sonlight HBLK for the fall, are there any activities or hands-on things in the history section? So if it was HBLK from American history, then there is not a hands-on history kit that I know of yet for that program. I would love one. I hope they're in the process of developing one. But from what I understand, there's a hands-on history kit for world cultures, which is the current HBLK, as well as HBLB and HBLC. There's the hands-on history kits, and we love them. I actually made a dedicated video talking about how I felt about it, how it went last year, and we really enjoyed those kits, especially my daughter, who's very crafty. All right, and then this says, person has a rising third grader, an 8.5-year-old boy, and a second grader, almost 7-year-old girl. That sounds like my family. We have never used a literature-based curriculum. Would you recommend HBLK, A, or B? Oh, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure when this was written as to what those signify, if that was the original K or the new K. But what I would say for those ages, third and second grade, we did HBLB when my kids were in third and second grade at those ages, those exact ages. That's pretty much what my kids are at. We did HBLB and it was wonderful. I feel like you probably could do HBLA, which is now American history, if you felt like you were mapping out kind of where they were ending up, and you'd rather your kids be on maybe the older age range of things. But I think HBLB was really fun for my 3rd grader and 2nd grader last year. I even have a video that I'll link that too for anybody who's interested in that. Another one is my oldest is 5, 6 in December, going into kindergarten grade level, but my 2 girls will just be turning 4 and 2. So she has a pretty young family. What would you recommend for us? Level T or level P for pre-K? Also, how long do you say the HBL takes? Okay, the 2-year-old doesn't really count, I'd say, but for the 4-year-old and the 5-year-old, I think you could do either level, although I feel like the pre-K level is just wonderful. It would be, probably pre-K would be better for maybe your kindergartner. Oh, it depends. I feel like both are really great. We've done both levels. I kind of did a condensed version with my twins. We just came to Sonlight too late to kind of do them at those younger years. But, oh, that's really hard. I feel like either would be good. I would recommend doing a little bit of, again, not super long-term planning, but to just kind of look at where they'll be in a couple years and what you might want to use. I feel like the level that everybody's the most concerned about, myself included, was when are my kids going to get to level D? Because I intend to use Sonlight for as long as I can. And level D is really where it switches over, where the readers, the kids' independent reading links into history. And so those have a bit thicker chapter books, and then it's American history, and it's just a little bit harder maturity-wise. So you kind of answer the question of where do I want those 2 kiddos, like your 5-year-old and 4-year-old, to be at level D? And once you kind of figure that out, you can kind of back calculate a bit, if that makes sense. That's probably how I would do it. But I also feel like it really doesn't matter because all of the levels are so rich and you wouldn't lose out. You're not like missing out. You could definitely have such a wonderful literature rich experience with any of those. And so I'm going to move on. But it says, for the literature portion, were the questions more about reading comprehension, or were they questions to discuss things like discussion starters or moral takeaways from the stories? They're both. I feel like there are reading comprehension questions. Sometimes they're very straightforward questions like, did you understand what was going on here? Sometimes there are questions that don't have an answer, right? It's like, what do you think this child would have done, or how would you have felt in this situation when the father left and the mother left, or whatever it is? How would that have made you feel? Do you feel like you had a good response? So those are kind of discussion starters. And I feel like moral takeaways kind of wraps into that one where you have discussion starters. But you could also do narration, which I've talked a bit about already, is like, you don't have to tie yourself to these discussion questions. You could even come up with your own discussion questions after reading the passage. And some of them might be a little bit more reading comprehension and some of them might be more character development. So I'd say it depends on how you want to take it. Like, you are in charge of your curriculum. It does have discussions questions, and sometimes I use them and sometimes I don't. And the more comfortable you get with Sonlight and literature-based, the better I've gotten at using those or modifying them or replacing them completely, if that makes sense. Okay, it says, do you need a timeline book for every kid? It depends. It depends on your family. It depends on how much space you have, what you want to do there. I have done one for every kid only because they take ownership of it. Like, they color it or they want to set it up a certain way. And the idea that it will grow with them and they can add little marks to it. Like, sometimes it doesn't have like a timeline figure, but it'll have like a timeline point where they can write in like the Boston Tea Party or something like that. So they can write it in themselves in their little handwriting. And I feel like it personalizes it and it makes it mean more to them than, say, a family timeline book. And also, like, if we did a family timeline book, then my twins, when they come along, they have no stickers to put in, right? The stickers would have already been put in. So the timeline book, it won't mean as much. And so that's just for me, is I feel like either individual ones or maybe the sets, like if you're kind of teaching in groups, each group gets its own timeline book. I feel like you can kind of do it however you want based on what you want, but you don't have to, but I like it, if that makes sense. Okay, and then it says, I was wondering if Sonlight teaches about character, setting, main idea, and different types of books. Yes, it does. I feel like as we've been moving through the program, we get more of that. So is it done a ton in the early levels? Not a ton. As we're moving our way through the elementary programs, it's doing that more and more, where it will kind of throw that in when we'll talk about different types of like literary devices or different types book setups for that matter. And I know it just gets more and more as you go through like poetry or verse novels or anything like that. It will have those examples, but I wouldn't say it's super heavy in that in the early years. I'd say it's more about just enjoying the stories and enjoying kind of like the growth of the character and understanding the setting. Yes, I always talk about the setting at the beginning of books, and at the beginning of every reader or read aloud, there's usually like a summary section which tells you what the reader is about, and it'll give you the date and the place and all those things, so you can kind of set the scene for your kids, which helps out. And so we do that, and then it says, do you have any suggestions for where to buy used Sonlight material? All right, I actually made a whole video about this. I'll post that if I have enough cards to do that. Otherwise, it'll be linked below. I think there's wonderful resources for buying used. I'd say my best luck has been through Facebook, specifically the Facebook Sonlight buy, sell, trade groups, because that's the purpose of the group, is to buy and sell within that group. And I've had great luck. And I feel like the best thing to do is usually if you have enough time on your hands, like if you're like, I'm sure I'm going to be doing HBLB next year and it's like October, you could be on that group and waiting to see if anything comes up. Because oftentimes in the fall, sometimes people will put their stuff up because they tried Sonlight and it didn't work. And so they made it like 4 weeks and they just want to sell the whole thing. So that's a great time to get like almost brand new materials. So for instance, you could do that. Or if you're really on a tight budget, a lot of people will sell some much older editions on that group, and you can kind of make it work. So you can make a Sonlight work for you, even though you can get some of the older editions, which are still beautiful and wonderful. You know, they have worked for families for the past, 30 years or whatever. So yes, that's my best advice, is the Sonlight buy, sell, trade groups on Facebook. And then it says, so how many hours a day are you a Sonlight mama reading per day? Oh, right. I read quite a bit, but I'm trying to think about like timing wise. I'm currently juggling 2 different HBLs and sciences, one kindergarten, which is pretty minimal, and one that's HBLC and Science C. I did just make a day in the life for HBLC and Science C, which will help you see kind of about how much I'm reading. But I am planning some videos to actually kind of maybe even time it here coming up, because I've always been curious as to exactly how much reading I'm doing. It varies, and it's never all at once, because one, your kids or my kids wouldn't sit for that, wouldn't sit for it to be all at one time. But the other thing is that my voice wouldn't handle that. And so we kind of rotate between like math and language arts and then things like science and history and throughout our day. So that way it doesn't feel like too much reading. It's just the right amount. I don't know. So look for all those videos. I have a couple. I actually have an HBLB one and an HBLK one. It was American History, where I went through the books for the week, so you can kind of get an idea about that. And so look for those in my Sonlight playlist as well. And so this is the last question. There's a couple questions in here though. It says, do you still do other read alouds for your kids' interest? Do you do those at different times? If so, I feel like there's other great books I want my kids to read. Yes, I do a lot of other reading with my kids, and actually Sonlight says you should. Like, they don't schedule like the entirety of the Narnia series or like the Little House on the Prairie series. Like, they're saying you should read those. You should read those with your kids if you're interested in that, or the Green Ember series. There's so many ones that are not in Sonlight that I want my kids to read, or I'm excited to read with them. And so yes, we read extra, and currently we still can. And I talk about these a lot in my monthly update videos. We always have a nighttime read aloud for both my big kids. So I currently have a 4th grader and a 3rd grader. So I read to them, and then my husband reads to our twin kindergartners. And we always have extra books. Like, for instance, we finished the whole series of the Heartwood Hotel, which the first one was scheduled like week 2 of HBLK. And then we just got the next 3 books, and they read all of them at night. And then we did Mouse and the Motorcycle. We're doing the Very, Very Far North with them. I do Harry Potter with the big kids, the City of Ember. There's lots of books that I love to read with my kids, and I just love reading aloud. And this is nice because then there's the fun books that they get to choose, but then there's also the books we do for school, and they're able to see the difference. They're able to understand that like the ones we do for school might not be as fun as like the Green Ember or Harry Potter, but they see the value in the fact that it is really teaching about Vikings, or it's really teaching about the medieval times, like what it would feel like to be a squire in a castle or things like that. It really helps those ideas solidify. And so they don't like push back and like think those are boring and their nightly reads are fun. They just kind of have them in two different compartments, if you will. But yes, we totally read extra books. And what's nice is I'm still able to do that. And then my kids are starting to take off with reading. So I can also give them those books, or even if they can't read some of these books, they can listen to them on audio. And so those books are still very much something I'm prioritizing in our life, even though we do a literature-based program. Granted, there's probably going to be some times when I can't balance it all, but I will try because I love to read and I really love a lot of these stories and I want to make sure my kids get to experience them too. So yes, that is all of my questions for HBL. History, Bible, Literature questions for today. And then again, like I said, part 1 was science and language arts. And then please give me some more questions, more Sonlight questions. I love answering them. I love chatting about kind of your situation. Like I said, you can be real specific and give me specific things about your family and what is going on, or real general, and then I'll make another video. So I hope you guys like this. I hope it was helpful to just kind of hear all of these different questions from all parts of Sonlight. And yeah, so that's what I have for this video, and I hope you all are doing well. Please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to, and I will see you all in the next homeschool video. All right, guys, take care.